"We've decided you're no longer part of the family," my brother said when I refused to sell my barbershop to pay off his $1 million debt. Everyone nodded, but I smiled and said, "No, you're the one who's out," and I pulled out a folder that left them all in shock. My name is Nathan, and for as long as I can remember, I've lived in the shadow of my brother, Dylan. It's not that I blamed him for everything, not at first. When we were kids, I looked up to him like a hero. He was 3 years older than me, tall, with a smile that made everyone love him instantly. He always had a joke ready, a story to tell, and a way of moving through the world like everything belonged to him. But over time, I realized it wasn't just his charm that made him special. It was my parents, James and Margaret, who treated him like a king, while I was left like an old rag in a corner, forgotten and worthless. I remember one time, when I was 5, my dad came home with a big box wrapped in shiny paper. It was Christmas, and I was excited because I thought, finally, I'd get something good. Dylan had already opened his gift, a red bicycle with training wheels that gleamed under the tree lights. I ran over, my heart pounding, and opened the box. Inside was a pair of gray socks, the kind sold in packs of 3 for $1. "What's this?" I asked, looking at my mom with wide eyes. She didn't even glance at me. She was busy helping Dylan take his bike to the yard. "It's what you get, Nathan," my dad said, shrugging. "Don't be ungrateful." Dylan rode past me, laughing, and I stood there, socks in hand, feeling something inside me break. That's how it always was. Every birthday, every holiday, every moment that could have been special, Dylan got the best, and I got the scraps. For my 7th birthday, they promised me a party. I imagined a big cake, balloons, friends running around the yard. But when the day came, my party was a small, dry cake my mom bought on sale because it was about to expire. My gift was an old t-shirt that smelled musty, like something from a thrift store. Meanwhile, Dylan, who wasn't even celebrating a birthday, got a new pair of sneakers because, according to my mom, he deserved them for being such a good son. I didn't understand what that meant. What had I done to deserve nothing? My parents always had an excuse. "Dylan's special," James would say, as if that explained everything. "He's got a bright future, and we're helping him get there. You should learn from him." Learn from him, as if I were a mistake, a rough draft that needed fixing. Margaret was the same. If I dared complain, she'd give me that annoyed look and say, "Don't be jealous, Nathan. Not everything's for you." But I didn't want everything. I just wanted a piece, something to tell me I was part of the family, too. When we started school, the gap grew wider. Dylan was the king of the classroom. Popular, a great athlete, always surrounded by friends who followed him like he was a star. I was the quiet one, sitting in the back, getting good grades because it was the only thing I could control. Once in 6th grade, I won a math competition. They gave me a small plastic medal, but to me, it was like a gold trophy. I ran home, excited, and showed it to James. "What's this?" he said, barely glancing at it before tossing on the table. "That's useless. Look at your brother. He's doing important things." That day, Dylan had scored a goal in a soccer game, and my parents spent the night talking about how proud they were of him. My medal ended up forgotten in a drawer. They never came to my school events. If I had a presentation, a project, something to show, there was always an excuse. "We're busy. That's not a big deal. Help Dylan with his homework instead." Because, of course, Dylan didn't even study. I did his assignments to keep him from failing, and he took the credit. Once I worked up the courage to ask them to come to a science fair I'd prepared for weeks. It was a model volcano that even spewed smoke, and my classmates had congratulated me. "What for, Nathan?" Margaret said, laughing like it was a joke. "That doesn't matter. Go practice with your brother. He's got a game tomorrow." I didn't go practice with him. I stayed in my room, staring at the volcano, and promised myself that one day I'd do something they couldn't ignore. When I finished high school, I had a clear dream. I wanted to open my own barbershop. Since I was 15, I'd loved cutting hair. I started practicing on my friends in the backyard, using old scissors and a comb I found in a drawer, charging $1 per cut. "You've got a knack, Nathan," my friend Charlie would say as I trimmed his bangs. "You should do this for real." That idea stuck in my head like a nail. But when I told my parents, they laughed in my face. "That's not a serious business," James said, wiping tears from laughing so hard. "Those are poor people's dreams. Look at Dylan. He's got vision. Dylan wanted to start a sportswear company, and my parents didn't hesitate to pour all their savings into helping him. They left me with nothing. I had to start from scratch. I got a job washing cars at a shop near home. I stood under the sun all day, hands wrinkled from water and soap, earning just enough to eat. Then I took another job handing out flyers on the street, walking for hours with the heat burning my neck. Later, I carried boxes at market, breaking my back for pennies. Every dollar I earned went into an old tin I hid under my bed. I didn't spend on anything unnecessary. Meanwhile, I watched Dylan live like a king with my parents' money. He bought a car, moved into a nice apartment, and every time I visited, he'd look at me with that smug smile that made me want to wipe it off his face. "Still cutting hair, Nathan?" he'd say, like my effort was a joke. But I didn't give up. After 5 years of working like a mule, I saved enough to open my barbershop. I called it Nathan's Clip. It was a small place on a corner in a humble neighborhood. The walls were peeling, and the floor had stains that wouldn't come out no matter how much I scrubbed. I bought 2 secondhand chairs from a flea market, a big mirror with a crack in the corner, and a clipper that buzzed like it was on its last legs. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first day I opened, almost no one came. I sat in one of the chairs, staring at the empty street, and thought maybe my parents were right, that this was a stupid dream. But then Charlie, my lifelong friend, walked in and said, "Cut it good, man, and I'll bring people." And he did. Little by little, the barbershop started to grow. First, my friends came, then their friends, and then strangers who heard that Nathan's Clip gave good, cheap cuts. I worked Monday through Sunday from 8 in the morning to 9 at night. My hands got calloused, and my back ached like I'd been beaten, but I didn't care. Every satisfied customer was a victory. In 2 years, I had a steady clientele. I hired 2 kids from the neighborhood to help, and I even put up a new sign out front, one that glowed with red and white lights. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was worth something. Meanwhile, Dylan wasn't doing as well as everyone thought. His sportswear company started to falter. He made bad deals, got mixed up with shady people, and began asking my parents for more money. James and Margaret, blind as always, gave him everything they had. They sold a plot of land they'd saved for years, took out bank loans, and got themselves deep in debt. I watched from the outside, saying nothing. Part of me wanted to help, because despite everything, they were my family. But another part, the one that still remembered the laughter, the dismissals, the gray socks from Christmas, told me it wasn't my problem. Things got ugly one Saturday afternoon. I was in the barbershop, finishing a shave for a customer, when my phone rang. It was my mom. "Nathan, we need to talk." "It's urgent," she said, her voice trembling like she was about to cry. I hung up, finished the cut, and closed the shop. As I walked to my parents' house, I felt a knot in my stomach. I knew something big was happening, but I had no idea how much everything was about to change. When I got there, all 3 were waiting, James, Margaret, and Dylan, sitting in the living room like judges in a courtroom. The table was cluttered with papers, and the air smelled of burnt coffee. They looked at me with serious faces, and I knew this wasn't a casual visit. I sat on an old chair that creaked under my weight and waited for them to speak. "Nathan," my dad began, crossing his arms, "your brother's in trouble. He owes a lot of money, millions, and if he doesn't pay, he'll go to jail. We need you to sell your barbershop to help him." I froze. Sell my barbershop? The place I'd built with my own hands, without a cent from them? I looked at Dylan, who was pale, sweating, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't say a word, like he didn't have the guts to face me. Then I looked at my mom, who nodded with that "it's the right thing" face. "We're family, Nathan," she said. "Family helps each other." "No," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. The 3 of them stared at me like I'd lost my mind. "What do you mean, no?" James shouted, slamming his fist on the table. "This is for your brother. You can't be that selfish. I'm not selling the only thing I have for someone who's never given me anything," I said. I stood up, feeling something break inside me, but also a freedom I'd never felt before. "You've chosen Dylan my whole life. You gave him everything and me nothing. And now you want me to throw away my hard work for him? No. Find another solution." "Nathan, please," my mom begged, tears in her eyes. "If we don't help him, he'll go to jail. He's your brother. Let him pay what he owes, I said coldly. I've got nothing to do with his problems. I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door. I heard James yelling something, Margaret crying, Dylan muttering insults, but I didn't stop. I left that house with my heart racing, but also with a certainty I wasn't giving in. Not this time. That night, in my small apartment above the barbershop, I couldn't sleep. I knew they wouldn't give up easily. My parents and Dylan were experts at manipulating and making me feel guilty. But this time was different. I had an ace on my sleeve, something I'd been preparing for months. That night, after locking the door behind me, I stayed up until 3 a.m. Part of me felt guilty. Despite all the dismissals, the years of being the forgotten one, they were my family. But another part, the one that had carried boxes in the rain and burned my hands in the sun to build something of my own, told me it was time to set a boundary. The Sunday after that fight, the barbershop was quiet. It was one of those days when people stay home, so I took the chance to clean. I swept the hair off the floor, wiped down the mirror, organized the scissors and clippers in the drawer. As I worked, my mind kept spinning. I knew my parents wouldn't sit idly by. James was stubborn as a mule, and Margaret always found a way to make me feel like the bad guy. And Dylan, well, he was an expert at getting his way. I imagined they were plotting something, some way to pressure me into giving in. But this time it wouldn't work. They had no idea what I had in store. Monday morning, while cutting a regular customer's hair, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and saw a text from my mom. Nathan, come to the house this afternoon. It's important. No details, just those dry words. I felt a chill, but not a fear, more like anticipation. I knew that text was the next step in their plan. I finished the cut, charged the customer, and sat for a moment in one of the chairs, staring at the red and white sign glowing out front. Nathan's Clip. That name was more than a business to me. It was my life, my pride, my proof that I didn't need anyone to succeed. And I wasn't going to let them take it away. I got to my parents' house at 5 p.m. The sun was still strong, and the heat made sweat trickle down my back. I knocked, and James opened the door. He gave me that hard look he used when he was angry, but said nothing, just stepped aside to let me in. Inside, the air was heavy, like it was charged with tension. Margaret was on the couch, eyes red from crying, and Dylan was standing by the window, hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. I sat in the same old creaky chair and waited. Nathan, James started, crossing his arms like a judge about to deliver a verdict. We gave you 2 days to think it over. Your brother's in serious trouble. He owes millions, and if we don't help, he'll go to jail or worse. We asked you once, and now we're telling you. Sell your barbershop. It's the only way. I looked at Margaret, who nodded, tears in her eyes. Please, Nathan, she said, her voice breaking. He's your brother. We can't leave him alone in this. We're family. Then I looked at Dylan. He was pale with dark circles under his eyes, but he wouldn't meet my gaze. He stayed silent, like he expected our parents to do all the dirty work for him. No, I said, my voice calm but firm. The 3 of them went quiet, like they couldn't believe what they'd heard. What do you mean, no? James shouted, stepping toward me. This isn't a game, Nathan. Your brother needs that money. I'm not selling my barbershop, I repeated, looking him straight in the eyes. I built it alone, without help from anyone. You never gave me a dime, not a word of support. Everything I have, I earned. And now you want me to throw it away for Dylan? No, let him fix his own problems. You're selfish. Margaret exploded, jumping up from the couch. You've always been jealous. Dylan's your brother, and you're acting like you don't care. What kind of family are you? Family, I said, feeling something ignite inside me. You never treated me like family. From the time I was a kid, everything was for Dylan. The bike, the sneakers, the business. I got torn socks and was told not to be ungrateful. And now you talk about family? No, I don't owe you anything. Dylan finally spoke. He turned from the window, his face red with anger. You know what? We've decided you're no longer part of the family, he said, pointing at me. If you don't help us, you're out. We don't want someone like you with us. James and Margaret nodded, like they'd rehearsed those words 1,000 times. My dad looked at me with contempt, and my mom covered her face with her hands, like she couldn't bear to look at me. I smiled. I don't know where that calm came from, but I felt at peace. No, Dylan, I said, locking eyes with him. You're the one who's out. I reached into my backpack and pulled out the thick folder I'd been holding onto for months. I tossed it onto the table, and the sound of paper hitting would echoed in the room like thunder. Open it, I said, crossing my arms, and see who the real traitor is. The three of them froze. James furrowed his brow. Margaret stopped crying for a second, and Dylan stepped back, like he knew what was coming. What's this? My dad growled, grabbing the folder with trembling hands. He opened it and started pulling out papers one by one. There were copies of bank statements, receipts, fake contracts, messages I'd intercepted. It was all there, proof that Dylan had been stealing from my parents for years. What does this mean? Margaret said, staring at the papers with wide eyes. Dylan, what is this? It's a lie, he shouted, trying to snatch the folder from James. But my dad pushed him back and kept reading. There were transfers of thousands of dollars from my parents' account to unknown ones, all signed by Dylan. There were invoices for things they never bought, a car that wasn't in the garage, trips they never took, luxury clothes my parents couldn't afford. And worst of all, proof that Dylan had scammed several business partners, using the family name to take out loans he never repaid. You did this, James said, his voice shaking with rage. You stole from us. You left us in ruins with your lies. It's not what it looks like, Dylan stammered, but his face gave him away. He was sweating, pale, trapped. I stayed quiet, watching it all crumble. I'd spent months gathering that evidence, hiring a friend who knew computers to track the accounts, paying an accountant to check the numbers. I didn't do it for revenge, or so I told myself. I did it for the truth. But now that they had it in front of them, I couldn't help feeling a bitter satisfaction. Margaret started crying again, but this time it wasn't for me. How could you, Dylan? She screamed, throwing a paper at his face. You betrayed us. Your own family. Get out of my house. James roared, pointing at the door. I never want to see you again. You're a disgrace. Dylan tried to say something, but my dad grabbed his arm and dragged him to the door. He shoved him into the yard and slammed the door so hard the windows rattled. For a moment, everything was silent. My parents looked at each other, then at me. James dropped the folder on the table, and Margaret came closer, her face streaked with tears. Nathan, she said softly, we're sorry. We didn't know. We never thought he. He what? I cut her off. You put him on a pedestal your whole lives. You gave him everything and me nothing. And now that you see who he really is, what? You expect me to forgive you and help you. No, James said, raising his hands. We just want you to come back to us. You're our son. You always have been. But I didn't feel anything for those words anymore. I stood up, grabbed my backpack, and walked to the door. No, I said, without looking at them. You chose Dylan a long time ago. Now deal with the consequences. I left the house and didn't look back. That night, in my apartment, I grabbed a beer from the fridge and sat on the small balcony overlooking the street. I thought about everything that had happened. The years of dismissal, the effort to build my barbershop, the folder that changed the game. And I knew I wasn't going back. I wasn't going to help them financially, not after Dylan had stolen from me too. Because, yes, in those papers, there was something I didn't tell them. Part of the money missing from my savings, the fund I'd kept to improve the barbershop, had vanished into my brother's hands. I'd known for months, but said nothing. Until now, the phone rang. It was my mom again. I didn't answer. I turned off the phone, finished my beer, and looked at the city lights. For the first time in my life, I felt 3.3 weeks had passed since I walked out of my parents' house with the folder in hand and the truth about Dylan exposed like a sharp knife. 3 weeks since James kicked him out and Margaret looked at me with those teary eyes, begging me to come back to the family that never wanted me. I didn't answer their calls that night or the ones that followed. I turned off my phone, tossed the empty beer can in the trash, and promised myself that was the end. I wasn't going back. Not after everything. The first few days were strange. I'd wake up with a weight on my chest like something was missing. It wasn't that I missed them, not exactly. It was more the habit of having them there, even as a distant echo of dismissal and guilt. But little by little, that weight lifted. I'd get up early, open the barbershop, and lose myself in the sound of scissors snipping hair, the hum of clippers, the laughter of customers. Nathan's clip was still my refuge, my castle, the place where no one could tell me I was worthless. The neighborhood started talking about what happened. I don't know how word got out, but I guess Dylan wasn't very discreet after getting kicked out. Some customers would ask, with that gossip-hungry curiosity, "Is it true your brother stole from you, Nathan? What happened with your family?" I just smile, shrug, and say, "Life happens, man. How do you want to cut?" I didn't like giving details. I didn't want my story to become neighborhood gossip for people to chew up and spit out. What happened, happened, and I was ready to move on. A few days later, I hired a new kid for the barbershop, a skinny 19-year-old named Mike who had a good hand with scissors. I taught him what I knew, and together we started handling more customers. I raised prices a bit, not much, just enough to start filling the hole Dylan left. I put up a sign out front, "Cut and shave, 2 for 1 on Thursdays." People started coming in droves, and in a month, I had enough to buy a third chair. It wasn't new, but it was in good shape, and with a little paint, it looked brand new. Every time I saw a customer sitting there, I felt like I was beating Dylan, my parents, everyone who ever looked down on me. One Saturday afternoon, while cutting a neighbor's hair, the barbershop door opened, and James and Margaret walked in. I froze, scissors in the air, comb in my other hand. The customer, an older man who always got the same classic cut, looked up and said, "Everything okay, Nathan?" I nodded, finished the cut quickly, and told Mike to handle the next one. I wiped my hands on my apron and walked over to my parents, who were standing near the entrance looking like wet dogs. "What do you want?" I said, no greeting. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of pretending everything was fine. "Nathan," Margaret started with that soft voice she used when she wanted to convince me of something. "We came to talk. We can't keep going like this. You're our son, and we need you." James nodded, hands in his pockets. "What happened with Dylan? We had no idea. He betrayed us all, but especially you. We wanted to come back, to be a family again." I looked at their faces, the wrinkles etched by stress, the tired eyes. For a second, I felt pity. But then I remembered everything. The gray socks at Christmas, the laughter when I shared my barbershop dream, the times they left me alone while giving Dylan the world. And I knew it wasn't pity I felt. It was anger, still alive, still burning inside me. "No," I said, crossing my arms. "You don't need me. You need my money, my barbershop, what I built without you. But that's not happening. It's over. Don't be like that, Nathan," James said, raising his voice. "We're your parents. We gave you life. You gave me life, but never anything else," I replied. "You left me alone since I was a kid. Everything I have, I earned myself. You chose Dylan, and now that he's left you in the street, don't come looking for me like I'm your lifeline. I'm not." Margaret started crying, and James stepped toward me, like he wanted to grab me. But he stopped when he saw my face. I wasn't yelling, wasn't shaking. I was calm, steady, and that scared them more than anything. "Get out," I said, pointing at the door. "And don't come back." They stood there for a moment, like they expected me to change my mind. But I didn't. Finally, James took Margaret by the arm, and they left. I watched them go through the glass door, their shadows fading into the street. And for the first time, I felt nothing. No guilt, no sadness, no anger. Just peace. That night, after closing the barbershop, I went up to my apartment and pulled out an old notebook I'd kept. I started writing a plan: paint the walls, buy an air conditioner, maybe open a second location in another neighborhood. It wouldn't be easy, but nothing in my life ever had been. And that was okay. I'd learned to fight for what I wanted, to build with my own hands, to depend on no one. Months passed, and the barbershop kept growing. Mike became my right-hand man, and I hired a new girl, Lauren, who was a wizard with modern cuts. The hole Dylan left in my savings filled up, and I even had some left over. I got the air conditioner, painted the walls a deep blue that gave the place class, and bought a comfy couch for waiting customers. Every time I looked around, I felt like that place was more than a business. It was my victory. I didn't hear much more about Dylan. I heard rumors he'd been arrested and was serving time for shady deals. My parents, from what I was told, were still in the same house, but poorer than ever. Once, I got a letter from Margaret, apologizing and saying they missed me. I read it, folded it, and threw it in the trash. There was nothing to say. A year after all that, I was in the barbershop one Friday night, finishing the last cut of the day. The customer, a young guy with a big smile, tipped me and said, "You're the best, Nathan. This place is special." I thanked him, locked up the cash, and turned off the lights. I went up to my apartment balcony, opened a beer, and looked at the city lights. I thought about the kid I was, the one left with torn socks while Dylan rode his new bike. I thought about the young man who carried boxes and washed cars to build a dream. And I thought about the man I was now, free, strong, in control of his life. I smiled. I didn't need anyone else. Nathan's clip wasn't just a barbershop. It was my family, my home, my everything. And no one was ever going to take it from me.
Subscribe for more daily stories.